Hey everybody, it's Romania Black, and we're on episode 8 of Vinland Saga. Man, the last episode was so weird because it was kind of a tonally, we've had this really violent, painful show, and it was still that, but then there were like moments of comedy, and I was like, should I laugh? We've been through all this pain. I'm like, should I laugh at this? It's funny, but I've got a pretty dark sense of humor, so I was like, oh, this is great. But yeah, we were talking in the Discord the other day because as I'm recording this, episode 7 is about to come out on Patreon, episode 6 is about to come out on YouTube, and we were talking in the Discord about episode 7, and somebody was asking, well, what's going to be the thumbnail? And I'm like, it's just going to be a blonde at this point. It's like the last, half of the episodes have either been Askeladd or Thorfin. I don't see that changing anytime soon because Askeladd was so badass and awesome in the last episode. I would have to say, I think Askeladd is my favorite character right now in the series. He's so layered and interesting, and you get little glimpses at different sides of him that are really cool to break down. I have a feeling I'm going to like his character as we go. Or maybe they're about to duel, so maybe I won't see Askeladd anymore. Maybe he'll die in this episode and we'll never see him again. I doubt that. No, he's going to live. He's going to live and probably beat the snot out of Thorfinn, because I have a feeling that most of this story is going to be Thorfinn continuously dueling him over and over and over again. And it's just going to come down to whenever Askeladd gets old enough that he's not as strong as he once was and Thorfinn gets into his prime. That's what I'm picturing, right? Because I would imagine Askeladd's probably like in his 30s, late 30s, early 40s, and Thorfinn's probably, he's 16 now, so I imagine by the time he's in his mid-20s, Askeladd will be in his 50s, the tides will turn just a bit, and so that's what I'm fully predicting. The question is going to be, how long are we staying with Askeladd and Thorfinn in Thorfinn's teen years? How long are we staying with that? How's this duel gonna go? And what's gonna be the aftermath of the duel? That's the big question, right? I've had some people say too in the comments that Thorfinn's not a likable character. Honestly, I mean, yeah, Thorfinn's going through his angsty teenage phase, right? But it's justified. I feel like this series does a very good job of justifying why Thorfinn is mentally in the state that he is. He's not whiny. He's angsty edgelord for sure, but he's not whiny and he's not a brat. He is a 16-year-old that's devastated, that has just been through hell and just is so just apathetic to it all. He just has his mission and everything else just falls kind of to the wayside. But you understand why he is the way that he is, and you know his backstory, so I think it makes his character a lot more digestible than if we had started out with Thorfinn like he is now and didn't have that backstory until later in a flashback. It wouldn't have the same impact that it does now. So I'm totally on board with Thorfinn's character. Askeladd's he's such a delight. And I do like Bjorn a lot too. Bjorn's really great too. And even the Vikings, as twisted and cruel as they are, you kind of end up, they're like a band of pirates. They're pirates that aren't glorified. That's the thing. A lot of pirate stories glorify the pirates and make them like, oh, they're just a merry band, when it's like, well, pirates are pillaging and plundering and killing people. This series doesn't shy away from, yeah, these Vikings are killing people and plundering, but there is an endearing factor to it because you realize they are still people at the end of the day. This is just their lifestyle. This is just how they live. And it's like, okay, what do we do with that? So yeah, it is scorching hot outside. I've not made it any better by pouring coffee. I don't know why, but I just, needed something. And so it's just really hot and sweaty outside. And I was like, I want to watch Vinland Saga and just see how grimy and gritty we can get, right? So we're on episode 8. This is a long series. It's a 24-episode series, so my rule of 8 doesn't really apply, but 8's my lucky number. So usually when the 8th episode airs, I'm like, okay, what are we going to do? And so that's kind of where I'm at now. I'm really excited to see what's going to happen in this episode. I couldn't wait. I was like, nah, I just need to watch it now and see what happens. So we shall see, won't we? But I've talked enough. Let's not waste any more time. We are going to start episode 8 of Vinland Saga, and we're going to start that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's go. Okay, so if I'm being honest, I had recorded my reaction to this episode, and then I had stopped the recording, and then I had opened up a new video and started my discussion. And I got about 17 minutes into it, and the power went out and shut everything off, and I lost the recording of that discussion. I saved the reaction, luckily, but so I went ahead and finished my discussion, and finish. You guys will know when it'll click over to when I restarted it. But so I'm going to go back and re-record those first 17 minutes and kind of think and remember what all I talked about in those 17 minutes. So hopefully that'll be good, but I was really frustrated. So luckily I kept the recording of the reaction, and I was able to go from here and record the rest of the discussion. But we're going to backtrack and talk about this episode. I loved this episode, first and foremost. This was a great episode. It did exactly what I wanted it to do. It talked about character development. It talked about themes. We got a little bit more into Askeladd. We got a little bit more into Thorfinn, and we have some plot progression. By the end of this episode, Thorfinn is 17. Our boy is growing up. Our boy Thorfinn is growing up. I honestly, going into this series, I thought the first season, because I knew there was going to be a second season, I thought this first season was going to deal with Thorfinn being a child and being a preteen. I thought that's as far as we were going to get. But he's already 17 years old. I assumed that season 2 would be him growing up and maturing into a man, but we may get to it before then. I don't know. But this episode was so good. There were so many connections to other shows, which I'll talk to when we get to it. I was like, I know I said it in the reaction, but I was like, yes. But the thematic elements that this show is tackling is really, really good. It's great. I love it. So we're going to kind of go through, and I'm going to go through, these are my notes I had up when the power went off, so we're just going to kind of backtrack through those and lead back to where I picked up the discussion at. But man, for the record, starting out this episode, I do want to make note, as someone whose family raises livestock, that is how you call a sheep. And it sounds weird, but when you call a cow, you're like, suck, 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 and they respond to it. It's the weirdest thing. But when he was calling those sheep, I was like, nope, that's pretty accurate. Even, 1,000 years ago, we were accurate, right? So this episode is very, very interesting because at first, these guys, they get cautious about the ships. They're like, oh, we need to go tell Gorm. But then like, wait a minute, because they don't recognize the ship at first because it's Thor's ship. But then I thought about it and I was like, wait a minute, have they been coming back every year though for the last 8 years? So they would recognize that ship, right? They'd know it was Thor's ship that they stole. So it's interesting. They don't realize it's Askeladd at first, but then they do. The parallels in this episode of Askeladd's village to Thorfinn's village are very interesting, and they don't go unnoticed. There's a lot of parallels to the homestead that Askeladd has that's very similar to Thorfinn's home in Iceland. It's interesting, right? Even down to people still having slaves, to the villagers, to everything. It's fascinating. But they're like, they finally made it back home. We survived another year. And they're like, oh, you didn't die, Bjorn. You still haven't died. Bjorn is interesting too in this. I really like Bjorn's character. If I had to pick a favorite at this point, Askeladd is my favorite, and I like Bjorn a lot. But I get Thorfinn's edginess. I get why he's edgy the way that he is, and I like it. It's fine. But yeah, Bjorn, he's great in this episode. He did a lot more than I thought he was going to. And we'll talk about it when we get later on. But they're talking about fattening up the sheep, and Askeladd's like, oh, they know we're coming. They're getting them fat because my uncle's stingy and he knows we're going to eat a lot of meat. So he's like, that's why they're getting them all fattened up. And everybody laughs. And it's just this Viking crew that has all this camaraderie. And then you have Thorfinn, who does not take part in it. Because Thorfinn, my buddy, Thorfinn, my dude, I know you don't think that you are. And you don't want to admit it. But you, sir, are a slave. He gets on to Hortolin quite a bit in this episode. He gets on to her about her being a slave. And I'm like, oh, dude, no. You are a slave. You are, in fact, a slave to revenge and to your past. And you can't let it go. And Askeladd knows it. And he's using you. It's so fascinating. The character work that we get with Askeladd and Thorfinn in this. And so it is actually winter. For a second when the episode started, I was like, oh, we bypassed winter. We're not going to get our duel. We just went straight into spring. No, winter hasn't come yet. They're just going south for the winter to hibernate, right? And Thorfinn's like, you better duel me. Like, that's what his face says. He's like, enjoy winter. You're going to duel me and die, so you won't enjoy it. It's like, oh, Thorfinn, honey. Thorfinn, my dude. So yeah, the parallels between Askeladd's village and Thorfinn's though are interesting. Like all the kids running up to see him and everything, and everybody in the village is so happy and they brought the treasure and stuff. And Gorm's village does pretty well for itself, right? Gorm's village is doing pretty darn well because they have 3 docks. Everybody looks like they're eating well. Like the houses are all really, really well established. And we kind of get a little bit of a timeline. So we have November of 1012 AD, the feudal Lord Gorm in the Jutland Peninsula. So Askeladd's family's got some connections. His uncle is a feudal lord. He's doing well for himself. And the crew is able to kind of make Askeladd very much, he knows how to use people, right? And we'll talk about that later on in this episode. But he understands that he may not love his uncle. He may not like him too much. He seems pretty indifferent about him. He seems like he likes poking fun at him because he knows he's a slave to his money. But he understands that Gorm is a resource and he's willing to use it and exploit it. He's like, this guy has enough food and enough shelter for all of my men for us to survive the winter, so we're going to use it. And he's going to take advantage of it, right? But everyone there in the village, they all use the men too. They like them. They bring them all this treasure and all this wealth. The girls, we'll talk about the girls in a minute, like beyond the edge of the sea. Yeah, they got all excited. They're like, oh, some of the guys died this year, so maybe we can become sailors too. Like, they look up to Askeladd like the people in the village in Iceland looked up to Thor's. There's that same level of respect that these people have for Askeladd that the people in Iceland had for Thor's. And it's fascinating. Especially this one freckled guy. I thought the freckled guy was maybe Gorm's son, or maybe he was like one of Askeladd's cousins, like maybe they were related. I don't know. He could just be a random kid in town that Askeladd just talks to, right? But he said he's going to sail with Askeladd. And they're like, oh, you're an idiot. You die in 3 days. Ha, 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 ha. And then Thorfinn, being the edgiest of edgelords, just bumps past, like, doesn't even say excuse me, just keeps going. That's the thing. He's so consumed with revenge that he doesn't act like a Viking. He doesn't act like a civilian. He acts... You know, Hortolin calls him out for it later, but he's acting like a slave. He doesn't act like he's this human being with free will. He's so consumed with the idea of revenge and just getting back at Askeladd for his father's death, he can't see anything else. He can't enjoy his life. He's stuck in this miserable state. Whereas Askeladd seems pretty much at ease with where he's at. He doesn't seem to care, right? But our edgy teen, Thorfinn. And this one guy, so the guy with the bear costume, the bear hoodie, he has the treasure going back. This one guy, he jumped off the ship, grabbed 2 ladies, and was like, peace out. Like, guy, he knows what's up. He's like, I've been at sea for a year. See ya. But Thorfinn can't enjoy any of it because that's not what's on his mind. Not at all. They're like, what's wrong with him? So we cut to Gorm's house. Gorm's house is very nice and elaborate. It's very well done with all the columns and beams and everything. And then it is not lost on me that there is an entire like cattle fence and these women are lined up like livestock ready to get their jewelry from Askeladd. I mean, and also to see Askeladd, right? But they're not really there. They're not there for any type of sexual advances with Askeladd, even though the one girl tells her friend, she's like, wouldn't turn him down. But no, they're there to wish him welcome home so they can get jewelry. And if you look at them in the picture, in the still here, they all have necklaces and bangles and bracelets. They've been getting jewelry from his other visits. And so they're welcoming him home so that he'll give them things, right? And he's like, oh, you girls, you're just as cute as ever. That DILF energy, I tell you, like, Askeladd can get it. I can't say I turn him down, but he's not interested in any of the ladies. No, he knows what they're there for. He knows the game. He knows that they're there for the necklaces. That's all they care about. And they're like, yeah, or a ring or something like that. There's this one woman. She's huge. She's like Ilva. She's like 6'3". And he's like, oh, Uncle Gorm, the girls here aren't modest at all, are they? It's wonderful. And he's like, let's talk about this as a serious matter. So Askeladd brings up that everyone here is a slave to something. We'll talk about that later on and the references that it has. But everybody's a slave. He knows Thorfinn is a slave to revenge. The girls, the women there, they're a slave to the vanity, to the wealth and the jewelry that he brings. And then we have Gorm, which we'll talk about, is a slave to his own wealth. But honestly, if I'm being honest, I kind of don't blame Gorm for being a slave to his wealth, because he's got to run this whole village, right? He's the feudal lord of this village. And Askeladd's just showed up with 100 men, 97 technically, with 100 men who are going to eat him out of house and home all winter, take his shelter, use his facilities. He's like, look, you can't just waltz in here with your guys. I feel like Gorm knows that Askeladd's using him, but he's family. So he's like, fine, if you're going to use me, I'm going to charge you for it. This ain't going to be some charity case. Like, I feel like if Askeladd had just came by himself, he would have been fine with it, but the fact that he brought 100 men, he's like, no, it's going to cost all this money to feed you and take care of you. So he's counting out all the money that it's going to take, and Askeladd's like, are we going to talk about money again? And then I love that he says the price of pork increase, like he's talking about like the inflation rates with it. And the look on Askeladd's face when he's like, the beer's charged separately, and he's like, oh, are we serious? Like, just Askeladd is just not amused at all, right? And he's like, stop worrying. He's like, I brought you enough money. I'm going to pay in full. We'll be fine. Give my men plenty of booze and food. You've got the resources. Just don't stop me. And he's like, oh, okay, well, if you're paying me, it's fine. That's what I wanted to hear. Yeah. So, because he's like, I'll buy you a drink. Yeah, because he's like, even I'll buy you a celebratory drink. Like, we're in my own house, but I'm going to buy you a drink anyway. And so that's when he sends Hortolin to go get the drinks. And I wondered for a second if she actually understood him, if she got that or not, but she seems to. And then he says, you really love money, Uncle. And he's like, is there anyone who doesn't? It's great. Looking at it makes me happy. So we talk about this idea of slavery and what makes, and it's for Gorm, being a slave to his money, it brings him happiness, right? For Askeladd, being the slave to revenge is not bringing him happiness, it's bringing him misery, because he can't live because he's so consumed by it. So it's curious that being a slave to something doesn't necessarily make you happy or sad. It has different impacts on people in different ways. And Askeladd realizes Askeladd's not amused by his uncle's slave to wealth. He's not amused by it, right? Which begs the question of what is Askeladd a slave to? Because he makes the comment that everybody's a slave to something. So what is Askeladd a slavery to? And so I kind of theorized it was maybe one of three things. Like, at first, is he a slave to freedom? Because wealth, Askeladd doesn't care. He steals all the treasure, right, in the last episode, but it was all for a means to an end, right? It was just to serve a purpose of being able to let his men be able to hibernate for the winter. So I don't think Askeladd's a slave to money. Askeladd does not seem to care about revenge on anything, so he's not a slave to that. He doesn't seem to care about his pride, we'll talk about that later, or his past. So maybe it's an idea that he's a slave to freedom, being able to do whatever he wants, go wherever he wants, take whatever mission he wants to. Maybe it's that. Maybe he's a slave to control. He seems to like being able to be in control of people. So like he likes being able to control people and use them. So maybe he's a slave to that. But honestly, at the end of the day, I really think that Askeladd is more of a slave to the concept of living. Because it's not that he's a slave to his pride or his past or money or vanity or anything like that. But Askeladd's always had kind of like a nihilistic view of everything, right? Just kind of like he doesn't really see the point. It's just you live and you die. So the irony maybe is that he doesn't want to die. He's a slave to staying alive and surviving. And so he'll do whatever he can to survive, no matter what. And that's what he's a slave to. And I don't think, and I could be wrong, I don't think we as the audience at this point are supposed to know what he is and isn't a slave to. I think it's just he brings up the concept, and the rest of this series with his character may be building upon, okay, what is he a slave to? And that's what we find out as we go. We don't know, right? We're not meant to know, I don't think. I think we're supposed to go throughout the series and just question it and theorize about it as we go. So then we meet Hortolin, who I honestly thought was Helga. I thought Hortolin at first was like a Helga equivalent, but a lot of these blonde girls look the same. So, and then we have the helmeted person at the end that kind of has similar, but the helmeted person, I'm going to talk about this later, has much more blonde hair than her. Hers is a lot lighter, so that kind of ruins my theory. So just ignore me when I talk about it later. But he asked her to go bring the wine, and she's like, oh, okay, yes, sir. And he makes the comment saying she's a troublesome woman. And Askeladd just seems kind of like, who is she? What a weird name, Hortolin. And he's like, Hortolin's a Norwegian name. Isn't that odd? He's like, it's a region from Norway. Isn't that like on our side and she's a slave? And he's like, yeah. He says that I bought her recently. She's the daughter of a feudal lord, but her family lost a battle and fell to ruin. So it seems like Gorm is very much aware of the system. That just like Askeladd, Gorm is aware that it's a dog-eat-dog world, and that at any moment in time, if you lose the battle, you yourself could become a slave. So you've got to keep winning and be the strongest in order to not fall to ruin like her family has. And I also like the fact that this show just basically shows how anybody can become a slave. Like, it doesn't have to be someone that's necessarily colonized. It's like, if you just lose one battle, it's over. Like, your world could completely be turned upside down. And it's kind of that realization of what Thors was afraid of at the beginning of the series and why he volunteered to like leave. He's like, fine, I don't want my family to end up like Hortolin. He's like, so I'll go to appease y'all, and so you'll leave my family alone, which they ended up doing. So there you go. But yeah, it's interesting how he talks about this whole system, and that it's just something normal, right? He said she was a beautiful girl and she was expensive, but she's slow at work. And it's funny that Askeladd's like, I feel like he doesn't care about her being a slave, but maybe he takes somewhat pity on her, or he's like, or maybe he thinks that she knows what's up. But when he says rich girls are useless, they just have a lot of pride. And Askeladd's like, no, I don't think that's it. And he looks over and sees Thorfinn walking around, and I don't think he thinks Thorfinn is rich, because Thorfinn was not from a wealthy family. They were just sheltered and well off. That's kind of how Thorfinn and Hortolin are similar, is that they were both from well-off families that just kind of fell. Thorfinn's world fell to ruin just like how hers did, but just in different ways, right? But I feel like in that moment, I thought for a second that Askeladd was going to like try to like pull a prank on Thorfinn and like get him and Hortolin like in a situation where they had to talk to each other and like do something with that. But in hindsight, that's not with Askeladd's character at all. He sees Thorfinn and remembers the duel, and that's when he connects back to what I'm gonna talk about here in a second with using people. But he asks Gorm to be a witness, and I love that he says, I gotta do a duel before dinner. Like, he knows he's gonna win before he even walks onto the battlefield. Like, that's how confident Askeladd is. He's like, I know I'm gonna win, and I just gotta go get this over with. But then we have the conversation that he has with Gorm about using people. So yeah, so he says he's gonna have this duel with Thorfinn and talks to him about it, and and then I love that Gorm is just like, wait, what? What is happening? Oh my gosh, it's ridiculous, right? So, but here's the thing. He tells him, he's like, it's not that the slave girl is useless. It's not her fault that she's useless. It's the fact that you're just bad at using her. So his whole thing is he's like, you need to know how to use people. That's what you need to know. And that's gonna get you far. And so and as he's saying this, it's talking about Thorfinn, and he's looking over and his eyes like narrowing at him. He's like, you can make use of anyone with the right approach. So he knows that he is stringing Thorfinn along. He is completely self-aware. He's like, this kid is a slave to revenge. He is a slave to revenge. And that's just how all this is going down. He's like, and as long as he's going to be a slave to this and was hell-bent on getting revenge on his dad, he's like, I can use it. He's like, I can manipulate this kid. I can emotionally string him along. And Thorfinn, you would think that Thorfinn would see past it. That, yeah, but here's the thing. Askeladd, we the audience, through the series, we see those little glances and all those little nuances. We see all of those things that allow us as the audience to understand that there's more to Askeladd than meets the eye. And I think Bjorn knows that there's more to Askeladd than meets the eye. But Askeladd, surprisingly for Askeladd, he keeps things pretty private with himself. If you notice, while he's at this village the whole time, he's hanging out with his uncle, he's hanging out in public, he's making a public statement that I'm here, but he's not with a woman, he's not like, you know, doing anything out, he's just kind of by himself, right? And so it's interesting that Askeladd he keeps to himself and he's private. So we, the audience, have seen like little glances and gestures that he does that shows us that, yeah, there's more under the surface. Thorfinn, 16-year-old edgelord, does not see these things. He's just, he can't see past the wall that is revenge. And he just keeps thinking, oh, it'll be fine. I'll get revenge and then move on. And it's like, it's not that easy, right? It's a duel. And everybody's like, oh, you can do it, kid. Don't lose to him. And everybody's just cheering him on. It's great. And the thing of it is that Askeladd knows he's going to win. Because he's like, well, I'll be done before dinner. Ha, ha, ha. And so then Gorm is the witness. He is the one announcing the duel. Each can choose their own weapon, and Thorfinn has the knives and Askeladd has his sword, and they're like, you have to fight with honor and each of you shall die and pass through the gates of Valhalla. And I wanted to make a note that during that entire spiel, Askeladd does not seem like he remotely cares about the Valhalla speech. He's just like, because maybe he doesn't believe it. Askeladd does not seem like a religious person at all. And they're like, oh, he's one of Askeladd's men? And so the kid, the freckle-faced kid, said maybe he'd even let someone like me sail with him. And Bjorn's just like, you don't even know. And so all the girls with the jewelry, they're like, oh, he's kind of cute. I was waiting for the girls. Honestly, when we first saw the girls lined up, I thought they were greeting Thorfinn. But Thorfinn he's so consumed with revenge, he doesn't even have time to think about a girl. No, the 17-year-old kid, he doesn't even have time for that. But the other girl's like, Askeladd has more money and he's strong. So that one girl's not just in it for the money. She'll acknowledge Askeladd's a strong dude. Good for you. But yeah, the reason for the duel is for Thorfinn to avenge his father's death. Yeah, no, and everybody's like, no objections. And Askeladd's like, nope. And so then we start this whole duel. And the thing of it is that Askeladd for a brief second is like, because all the guys are like, man, Thorfinn's so stubborn, he just can't let this go. And Bjorn, I want to make a note about Bjorn. Bjorn is fascinating in all this. Bjorn, our boy Bjorn, I honestly think that Bjorn does care a little for Thorfinn. I do think that Bjorn cares. I do. Do I think he feels guilty? No, not at all. But I think that he does care about Thorfinn a bit. I feel like Askeladd cares too. It's just Askeladd won't ever admit to it, and he frames it kind of in a different way. Maybe he's a slave to taking care of Thorfinn. Maybe he's a slave to that. I think it's more the living thing. But I think Bjorn wants Thorfinn to live. He sees the potential of this kid, and he wants him to live through it, right? And to become an adult. And so I love that Askeladd's like, oh, hey, you got taller, didn't you? Yeah, you're bigger than before. He's like, how old are you again? I know he knows. He has to know how old that kid is. He has to. He's like, how old are you again? And Thorfinn just doesn't say a word. He's like, don't mock me. None of that. He's like, you were only this tall back when we last fought. And Thorfinn wastes no time. He's like, I did not come here to mess around. Yeah, and he is just intense. I think... And there's like a little moment where part of Askeladd's like hair gets chopped off in the fray of it. He's like, you should go along with making small talk, but Thorfinn, no, with old men. And Thorfinn jumped back. I love that the one guy thinks that Askeladd sent him flying, and Bjorn's like, nah, he jumped out of the way. It wasn't that. He knew that he knew that getting hit would have been a bad thing. The one with the dagger has the advantage at close range. That's so true. Yeah, Thorfinn has the close range advantage because he can get up close and do more with the daggers, which is why I think if Askeladd hadn't resorted to emotionally riling Thorfinn up, he would have lost the duel. That's the frustrating part for us, the audience. We're watching Thorfinn going, dude, if you just keep yourself in check, you could have won. You could have. But, And Bjorn's like, he's stronger now. So I think Bjorn sees Thorfinn's potential. He sees Thorfinn's potential, and he wants him to get stronger. He's like, you could be of help to us, kid. If you just get past this if you just get over your dad's death, which is easier said than done. And so it's like, nice kid. He's like, Askeladd, do it. Mm-hmm. And Askeladd gets pretty serious in this point here, and then I love the whole thing of dropping the sword, and Bjorn's like, oh, he's good, and Askeladd, he's smart, and so he goes to grab the arm, and that makes Thorfinn back away, because he knows not to mess with Askeladd. Mm-hmm. I love it. And then him grabbing the sword, and I think at this point Askeladd's like, I'm not going to win this just by my strength alone. He's like, what was your father's name again? And it's such a taunt. Because it's like, you know his name. You know how he died. It's such full of shit. He's like, you're just playing this kid. Yeah, you're just playing this kid. It's so frustrating. He's like, you're not old. And I love that Bjorn is so quiet. Bjorn's like, oh, come on, Askeladd. I'm wondering if Bjorn is ever going to comment, because I think at that point, Askeladd thought that there was a chance he could lose the duel. But he knows that he can use Thorfinn, and he knows he can use Thorfinn's revenge and desire for it. So he's like, and Askeladd's thing, too, is that Askeladd is not afraid to play dirty if it fits. Because what he does is not cheating. He doesn't cheat by any means. He just says things, and Thorfinn gets riled up from it. So he doesn't actually cheat during it. He doesn't do anything illegal in this duel. He just talks, and Thorfinn lets the words affect him. So that's the problem, is that Thorfinn lets all the words affect him. That's the issue, right? And he's like, but I know you're in the middle of getting revenge, so I feel bad saying for this. It's like, no, you don't. You know exactly what you're doing. He's like, I've killed a lot of people. I just don't remember your dad. And it's like, bullshit, you don't. You do too remember him. He's like probably the only one you remember. That's the thing. He's like, he's probably the only person you really remember killing. And he's like, do you remember how I killed him? Yeah. And he's like, what if maybe you're wrong and it wasn't me? And Thorfinn's like, you bastard. Like, that's all it took, was to get under his skin. He's like, if you'd fought him with honor, my father would have never lost to you. And that look from Askeladd, like, oh, really? If I had fought with honor. Because, yeah, that whole thing was that he did fire the arrow. But here's the thing. Thorfinn says, you took me hostage. And that's again, where Thorfinn doesn't quite get the full picture, right? He says it was because he was a hostage that Thor's died. And I'm like, no, that's not it. I'm like, that in Thorfinn's mind, yeah, that makes sense. But I'm like, the whole reason Thor's died was because of Floki, because Floki put the hit out on him. And because Thor's went in there, I think, knowing that he was probably going to die. That's the thing. Could Thors have told Thorfinn as a 6-year-old kid, I know I'm going to my death. I know I'm going. I have to take some of you with me, but I'm going to make it to where you all get out. Leif's going to take you out with you, and I'm going to give myself up because it's just the way things are going to have to go. There's no way around it. I can't stop them. But you can't tell a 6-year-old that without explaining all the politics and everything else to it. So for Thor's, he knew he was going to get shot with those arrows. He knew he was going to die. Thorfinn's involvement had nothing to do with it. But Thorfinn doesn't realize that because he was 6 at the time, and since then, none of these Vikings have explained the politics and how it's gone and how the mercenary thing has worked in that situation, so he doesn't know. So that's what he says. He blames himself, right? And Askeladd's like, that's the ticket. I'm going to use your guilt to keep you as my slave. So yeah, Thorfinn still has guilt, and that guilt ties to his anger and revenge and desire for it. And Askeladd's like, as long as you think that you're still responsible for your dad's death, I am going to use that and keep you under my thumb. Yup. He's like, he's the idiot who put down his sword to save a kid's life. And you know that that's not all of it. And that's the problem, is that Askeladd knows it, but he's so good with his words, and he knows just how to press the buttons on Thorfinn that it's, God, it's, And he's like, I got him. And I love that Bjorn at that point is like, kid, you had him. I feel like there's a part of Bjorn that wants Thorfinn to win. I don't think he wants Askeladd to die necessarily because they've been partners for so long. But I think there's a part of him that wants Thorfinn to win. And he's like, come on, kid. Like, you had it, right? You had it, but no. And Askeladd's like, cooler heads prevail. Cooler heads prevailed. And he just dislocates the shoulder. Oof. He dislocates that shoulder just to make a point and be like, okay, kid. It's not, he's like, nah. He's like, don't get so worked up. You haven't trained enough, kid. And he's like, damn you. And yeah, and then he dislocates the arm. Yep. Ouch. He's like, nope. Better luck next time. I thought for a second he was going to lean down and take the daggers, but he does not. He does not take the daggers. That was his dad. Instead, he tells Bjorn to pick him up. And he says, sure. And he's like, I'm hungry. Yep. I thought for a second that maybe they'd made bets or whatever. And so Askeladd's like, I won, so I get the nice food. I get the lamb breast with all the herbs and spices and all that fun stuff, right? Just like you promised, Uncle. Yeah, God. That fight. So yeah, I'm like, as long as Thorfinn doesn't know the full scope of everything, and as long as he keeps blaming himself for his father's death, then there's no way that he's going to beat Askeladd. He's just not gotten to that calm to like let everything go and be able to face him. It's just not happened yet. And so winter's starting to set in. We get the snow starting to fall. All the guys with their horns. There's guys fighting. There's guys like playing horns, dancing on the tabletops. Why not? There's like guys drinking and celebrating everywhere. The one blonde dude gets a whole plate full of pork links, sausage links, and goes to town on it, you know, like you do. And then the one guy comes back in that was supposed to guard the ship, and Thorfinn's staying on the ship to keep watch. And I like Bjorn looks over like, and they're like, is he in a bad mood because he lost? He's always been like that. And Bjorn saying he feels comfortable there because it's his father's ship. Used to be his father's ship. Just leave him alone. See, Bjorn is so interesting because he seems to be the only one out of the crew. Askeladd is too caught up in being the leader, and he's too proud, and there's no way he'll admit that he likes the kid. There's no way he'll admit it. But Bjorn's a step, Bjorn's not quite as proud maybe as Askeladd, and he's the voice of reason. It's like, leave the kid alone. It's his dad's ship. It's fine. In all honesty, if I'm being honest, I don't know why, but the voice acting for Thor's was weird this episode. It was weird. It didn't sound like him, and maybe it's bizarre, right? It did not sound like Thor's. It was the weirdest thing. I want to check to see the voice actor cast, because Amazon Prime will give you the voice caster list if you like pause the video. And so this one guy comes up to Askeladd and gives him the mead and tells him that the duel was amazing. And Askeladd's like, eh. And he's like, you threw him at the end, right? He's like, how'd you do that? That was so cool. And Askeladd's like, it's nothing major. He's like, should you be taking a kid like him sailing with you? What if he attacks you while you're asleep? And he's like, oh, I'll be fine. That's not going to happen. We covered that when he was 6. It's not going to happen. If a 6-year-old ain't going to do it, he ain't going to do it. He could never do it. And the guy's like, well, how do you know? What do you mean? He said, he's a warrior too, you know. He'll only accept victory with honor. And that shot of him seeing Thor's, it's like, you didn't forget. He's the one you won't ever forget. But it is interesting that he views Thorfinn as a warrior too. Saying that just like him, he's also, or it's either he views him as a warrior like he is, or like Thor's is. He won't accept victory without honor. Yeah. He's held back by his past and his pride. So that's the thing. He says that he's a warrior. He won't accept victory without honor. But he says he's held back by his past and pride. Because that is the one thing. Askeladd's not, or I said pride earlier, but Askeladd's not a proud man. No, he's not afraid to be dirty. But he does consider himself a warrior, though, so he does have some sense of honor, right? He does have respect for people that fight with honor. And so that's why he respected Thor so much. But Askeladd doesn't focus on the past. He's always moving forward. He's always looking forward and just seeing what's ahead over the horizon. He doesn't dwell on things. He doesn't seem like somebody that holds a grudge or dwells on things of the past. He just moves forward. He's like, this is just how it is. We just got to go forward. He doesn't, that relates to the whole thing about them asking how he died. And he's like, he just died. Like, it was in the past. It's over. Why do we focus on it? Move on, right? And he doesn't seem like somebody that focuses on the past or is proud. And he knows that those two things are things that people can become a slave to. They can become a slave to their pride and a slave to their past. And he's like, not about that. So it's interesting, right? And then the guy's like, oh, okay. And then that's when old Hortolin drops the plate and everything. And so I feel bad for her. He's like, you're not a noble woman anymore. He's like, stand up, you clumsy girl. And I feel sad. I feel sad that he like beats her and stuff in this scene. But the one guy says to Askeladd, he's like, I don't understand. If I had to live without pride, it's like, I'd rather kill myself. Meaning, as they're looking at her, they're being like, how can she live and be a slave? So people question, how can she live as a slave? And Askeladd seems to think, well, he's like, live without pride. He's like, lots of people have to do it. He's like, he's like, you'd be amazed at what you can do to survive. So I feel like Askeladd almost kind of respects her in a way, in a weird sense, because he sees that she's not proud. No, she went from nobility to being a slave. Pride is not in it for her, but she's just trying to survive without having to kill anybody. And I think Askeladd feels, it's the weirdest thing. We don't get any like verbal confirmation, but just the way Askeladd kind of looks at her and everything, I feel like he somewhat respects her and being like, you do you. If this is what you got to do to go on and live, do it. Because yeah, he laughs at him. He's like, did I say something funny? He's like, no, it's not you. And he says, look at my uncle. He's like, look. He says, it's terrible. Don't forget you're just a slave. He says, the guy who's a slave to money holds a whip and pretends to be the master of the slave he bought with his money. So he's like, isn't that the funniest thing? He's like, my uncle who's getting onto her and belittling her for a slave, the only reason that she's in his possession is because he's a slave to the money. And that money gives him this like false sense of power. He's like, but he could lose it just as easily and become a slave just like her. Like it could so quickly change. And he's like, he thinks that he has all this power just because of this one little thing that in the grand scheme of things isn't maybe as important as he thinks it is. It's so great, right? He's like, he's calling her a slave, but he's just as much of one. He's like, he just doesn't realize it himself. And Thorfinn doesn't realize it either, that he's a slave too. He doesn't. But Askeladd, he says, everyone is a slave to something. And at this point, that when he says everyone is a slave. At this point, I have to make an obligatory Attack on Titan spoiler. Only this one's for season 3. So if you've not watched season 3 of Attack on Titan, I'm obviously going to spoil some things. I probably spoiled it in the reaction, but I couldn't help it because that whole line about everybody being a slave to something, that is Kenny Ackerman. Attack on Titan. I was like, Kenny Ackerman's one of my favorite characters in that show. So of course, since Askeladd is relating to Kenny in that moment, I was like, oh man, like-minded souls. Kenny Ackerman and Askeladd would probably get along pretty good. And all this made me think of is, man, what if Kenny Ackerman took on Eren Yeager? What a different world that would have been. What if Kenny Ackerman had been the mentor for Eren Yeager? Wouldn't that have been something? Probably would have been something like this. Maybe not. Maybe not. Who knows? Who knows? It's funny, the comparisons. I'm like, oh, damn. That's really interesting. But yeah, the whole thematic elements from that season about everybody being a slave to something, it all ties back around in this. And it's very, very well done. But yeah, but Askeladd, end of Attack on Titan spoilers. But that's so true. Askeladd's like, everybody is a slave to something in this world. So it's funny when people try to act like they're better than others and they hold more power. He's like, no, you don't. He's like, no. It's a dog-eat-dog world, and everyone is just as fallible and likely to become a slave as the next. It's just, are you aware of it? What do you do about it? And Askeladd seems like he's very much aware of the system, and so he's taking advantage of it as much as he can. And it's like, you can't blame the man because he knows what's up. But yeah, but Thorfinn is a slave to his past. He's a slave to the concept of revenge. And I'll be honest, this scene with him on the boat, where he has this vision of his father in the mist, it didn't sound like Thor's. It's the weirdest thing. And I'm trying to look on here with Amazon Prime to see. No, it's the same voice actor, but it doesn't sound like him. He sounded weird. If I'm being honest, I thought this was Bjorn. I thought in this moment that Askeladd was kind of like in a daze and kind of hallucinating because he reverts back to his childlike self and sees his dad and cries with him. For a moment, I really thought that it was Bjorn coming to check up on him, and the fog was going to clear and we were going to see Bjorn standing in front of him. That's what I honestly thought, because Bjorn's like a big guy like Thor's. So I thought that's where we were going, but that wasn't it. But here's what's weird. What's weird in this moment is Thorfinn's memory of his dad, right? Thorfinn's memory. It's tainted, right? It's different. That's what's so odd about this scene and why it sounded like Bjorn. It's because of the wording that Thor's used. Thor's calls him a crybaby. He's like, hey, crybaby, hey, kid. I'm like, I don't think Thor's from episodes 1 through 4 would have said it that way. He wouldn't have said, hey, crybaby, and he wouldn't have said, hey, kid. He wouldn't have talked like that. But Thorfinn's memory is becoming affected from being away from home so long, and it's been 8 to 9 years since his dad has died, and he just, it's been 10 years since his dad's died, and his memory of him has altered over time. So when he says, do you want to get revenge? And Thorfinn as a kid nods his head, and he pats his head and says, well, you're my son. If I told you not to seek revenge, you wouldn't listen. And I'm like, I don't know if Thor's would say that. I think Thor's would tell him not to seek revenge, that's a bad idea. But this is Thorfinn's memory. This is his impression of his dad that he remembers. It's just kind of sad and scary that you can see that the last 10 years of him speaking with the Vikings, them calling him crybaby, calling him kid, like that language is starting to permeate into his own memory of his father and affecting the way that he remembers his dad. So that's fascinating. That's so interesting. That's why it sounded so weird. I'm like, okay. It kind of sounded like Bjorn. It's interesting. But yeah, he's like, this is a problem. I don't know what to say. And so at that point, I'm like, he doesn't know what to say. Thorfinn doesn't remember what his dad would say in a time like this. He's like, I don't know what to say. I'm like, Thor's would have something to say about it, but Thorfinn just can't remember. It can't click for him. He's like, maybe you'll just have to realize it on your own. And I do think that part is something Thor's would be like, you'll figure it out. You'll understand when you're older. But in that moment, God, seeing Thorfinn cry like that and him saying, I told you right. You don't. But now this part did stick. If anything from his father stuck with Thorfinn, it's this line, which is so funny because back in the flashback, he dismissed it, right? He didn't want to talk to his dad about it. He was like, But he says, you don't have any enemies. No one has any enemies. I love this. Like, and as he's sitting there in the snow. Yeah. And so a true warrior doesn't need a sword. And that's when that's when Hortolin comes and she nearly gets her head cut off by him. And she's like, oh shit. That may be the thumbnail, her going, oh crap. It's so good. And him being like, oh shit, no, whoops. And she was just trying to bring him some food. So that line, the one thing that he remembers from his dad talking to him is that no one has enemies. No one has enemies. And a true warrior doesn't use a sword. And I feel that kind of ties a little bit. It's sort of a mixture between Hortolin and Askeladd, right? Because I think Askeladd has the side of it where he doesn't really have enemies. Askeladd's like, I don't have enemies. I'm just a human living on this planet, just going day to day trying to survive. I don't have any grudges. I don't go out for revenge with people. I have no enemies. There's just whatever's in front of me. I just have to day to day be able to get by and survive and keep on going. And that's what he does. And then you have Hortolin, who does not want to kill anyone. She doesn't want to kill anyone. She wants to be able to live her life without killing and to say, and that be her freedom, right? So, is she a true warrior? I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that her and Askeladd kind of are, in some way, shape, and form, embody some of these ideas that Thor's was talking about in the weirdest of ways. Right? And I love that she was just, and Thorfinn's like, ah, shit. And she was like just trying to bring him some food. And he begrudgingly eats it. They have this little dinner scene. It's interesting. And of course, Thorfinn's, again, so confused, so consumed with revenge, that she's sitting here like freezing and he doesn't offer her a coat. Thorfinn is not a gentleman. He's our little feral edgelord. He's not a gentleman at all, right? I feel like Askeladd would maybe offer her a coat. Askeladd seems like a begrudging gentleman. Mm-hmm. And she doesn't go back inside. She stays out there with him. And she asks if he's a slave too. And he's like, what? No. She's like, well, you're eating out here instead of inside where it's warmer. And he says, I'm a warrior. Unlike you, I can eat wherever I like. I'm like, oh, you little condescending prick. Like, thank you for telling this slave that she, that was bought. He's like, well, I can eat wherever I like. I'm a warrior. And she's like, really? But I feel like you're the same as me. She's like, yeah, you kind of giving off those vibes, And Thorfinn gets mad at her. He's like, I have no idea how a slave feels. And it's like, oh, you don't? Really? If I were you, I'd kill Gorm and run away. I'd kill everyone who came after me, too. And she's just like, no, that's not how this works. She's like, well, you've not killed Askeladd yet or all the other Vikings, so how are you not a slave again? I feel like she just looks at him like you're really oblivious, right? Because, yeah, he tells her to kill Gorm and everyone that would stand in her way, and she's like, well, you've not killed Askeladd or Bjorn or any of those guys yet. But that's the thing. He says he's a warrior, and she's like, well, you could just kill him in their sleep, couldn't you? If you really wanted to get away? But she's like, kill him. I could never kill someone. And Thorfinn's like, then you'll be a slave the rest of your life. And the irony is him saying that to her. He's not acknowledging that because he can't kill Askeladd, he kind of is stuck in the same boat, right? But he's like, it's your choice. And then she says, she's like, what good would it do? She's like, if I killed him and ran away, and I ran as far away as I could to the other side of the ocean, what's the point? What's there? Like, why? What would be the point of it? There's probably nothing out there. She's like, so, she's like, if I ran away, what good would it do? Then I would just have this weight on my conscience that I killed someone, and what good did it do me? She's like, even if I go to the other side of the sea, all there are, it's going to be the same as it is here. There's just going to be wars and slave traders. So what's the point? And I love that. I love that in that moment, Thorfinn remembers the slave in the house. He remembers his dad performing CPR on the slave to try to keep him alive and telling him the story. And to let that man go without being in despair. And I love that he remembered that story even as a kid, and he tells it to her now. He shares that moment with her and his father's words. I love it so much. It's so perfect, and it makes me appreciate Thorfinn's character so much more, because even though he's a slave to revenge and he's hell-bent on it, and he's stubborn and he can't let go of his emotions, he's trapped by his past and his pride, even though that is the case, he still hasn't fully gotten away from what his father has taught him. There's still things that linger and remain with him. The phrase about no enemies lingers. The phrase about true warrior doesn't need a sword lingers. Even though Thorfinn doesn't understand it, even though Thorfinn doesn't get it, it's still there. It's still lingered. That's the important thing. And so the story about Vinland stays with him even after his father's death. Even if he doesn't quite understand it, he understands it needs to be told. And to her, she needs to hear it. I love it. Now her eyes are like a baby blue, right? And she's like, does a place like that really exist? And then I love that Thorfinn, does he give her an answer? Not really. She's like, does the luxury of a place like that really exist? And he doesn't answer her question, right? Doesn't answer. Okay. So then we see this image of this woman with the Viking helmet with the long golden hair. I'm like, it's been a year, so what? so that the question is, if this blonde girl, is this blonde girl Hortolin? Is she Hortolin? Because I was like, she's not Helga. Helga was too weak, right? Helga was really frail. I'm like, is she Hortolin, right? Because even though she seemed kind of weak back there, at the mansion with Gorm and them, at the village, maybe it's one of the cases that she's kind of like Thor's. Maybe she is a warrior. Maybe she is in fact a true warrior, but she'd kind of become like Thor's and had devoted herself to being pacifist and not fighting anymore. And so she's like, I'm not going to fight anymore. What good's it going to do? So maybe she is the one under the helmet. It's either Hortolin or it's somebody new that we have no clue about, which honestly, a bunch of these characters look the same. A bunch of these blonde girls look the same. So maybe that's the case. I don't think it's Helga because she was pretty frail. I don't think it's Ylva because her hair's too straight, right? But it's a new character, it seems, with the blonde hair. Now, is it a man or a woman? I thought it was a woman, but could be wrong. So we go to August. Now we have August. Let me get this right. August of 1013 AD in Jelling, Denmark. Okay, this is where the king is at. And so our boy Askeladd is going to be 17 years old. So he's growing up before our eyes, right? Mm-hmm. And we have old Floki, right? Everybody's getting ready for battle. The finest warriors from clans all over Denmark are gathering. Mm-hmm. And so in addition, we have 4 of our Yalm's Vikings brigades are hastening to join them. So 4 of them have come. Okay. And then Floki is like, everything is all according to Keku for the upcoming campaign. So it's finally, they waited until spring and summer had passed, and now it's October. And then we have our king. The time has finally come to show the insolent English scoundrels the power of the king. They said they were going to do it next spring and summer, but they waited till the fall. So there's clearly a little bit of a holdup, right? Mm-hmm. And then he's like, sir, we will fight without yield to achieve your highness's goal of capturing England. Yeah, the king looks a bit, where's Canute? So, the king looks a little bit frail. So we need to make note about that. That the king looks frail. Okay. We got that going on. And then in addition, he's like, he's here. Yes. So is Canute... So we have Canute. I'm guessing, is Canute the blonde? The blonde man? I thought it was a woman. Could be a blonde man. Not going to put anything past this show at this point. His Highness has arrived in Jelling. He's resting to prepare to march. And so then Ragnar comes in the scene. Ragnar is like, Ragnarok. Ragnar is like, oh, your highness does not need to come along. And they're like, he's a candidate to succeed the throne. I must give him a chance to display valor on the battlefield so that he doesn't lose to his brother Harald. So Harald is the brother of Canute that seems like he wants to duel him for the throne. Okay. And so he wants to make sure he's not going to lose to him on the battlefield. Okay. He's like, but his highness doesn't have much experience on the battlefield. Interesting. And he's like, Ragnar, I'm worried for Canute's safety as well. However, we're leaders of the Vikings. And so he says that if we don't demonstrate valor, the people won't follow. So we have to set an example. We can't shelter Canute. We can't shelter this lad. He's got to go on the battlefield whether he likes it or not. We can't show favoritism. We're going to sail in the morning and that's all there is to it. And Floki's with him. Interesting. So Ragnar's not happy about it. He doesn't like it. And we have this blonde that I'm guessing is Canute. I guess is the successor to the throne. Okay. Sure thing. And so then we have the ship and everything. And we see them all going out to sea in August of 10. So it is still summer. So it's August of 1013. That's right. So it is still technically summer. In August of 1013. We end in October. A Danish and Vikings fleet led by King Sweyn invaded the northern part of England, starting from the Humber River. So yeah, so basically they did start in August. In the region of Gainsborough, 5 cities were taken. Okay, so then we have Gainsborough, which I feel we've touched upon in this series already. And they have 5 cities taken. Okay. All right, so they managed to take 5 cities, and the main army continued to advance south over the land with great speed. And they overran the region and continued their advance. And you see them just like taking over everything, burning the villages, taking the women, doing all that sort of thing. And they've made their way through southern England and hit London, and that's where they hit their temporary halt in the merchant town of London. And then now it's October. Okay. And so then we end with October of 1013 in London. Okay. So we end up there, and that's where Thorkell comes. Thorkell shows up. Like all the ships and the fleets and everything. Everybody's having a battle at sea, and Thorkell just chucks that axe. And it flies through like 5 guys' heads like instantly and kills them. Fun times. Fun times. Oh my god. Amazing. And then there he be. Thorkell's like, what's wrong? Bring it on. This is a fun war. Oh my god. And here's the thing. He's aged. That I was wondering, because when you first see him with the blonde hair, you're like, man, is he going to look the same? No. He's got like the lines on his face, the wrinkles, the crow's feet, just like Floki and Thor's. I mean, it's been 10 years since the start of this, and so it's probably been closer to like 25 years, so he's probably in his 50s. So yeah, in his late 40s, early 50s. So yeah, it's been a while. So yeah, I like that they showed that he's aged a bit, but we finally got Thorkell back in this. Yes, please. He's back. He's back, bitches. I love it. So yeah, yep. So Thorfinn's 17 at the end of this episode. We don't know where Askeladd and his army are in relation to everything else going on. We just know Floki and his crew and Thorkell are out there on the battlefield. They're in London where they've reached an impasse and they're having a battle. We don't know where Askeladd and the others are in all of this. I'm assuming the blonde with the helmet is Canute. Assuming so, but we don't know. Don't know if it's a man or woman. Assuming it's a man. Is it Hortolin? We don't know. I'm just throwing all these random theories out there. Who knows who it could be? But we're going to find out, I'm sure. Right? We'll find out. I'm honestly surprised we've not checked in at all on Ylva and the others, but I feel like if they're going to do that, it's going to be like way later in the series. I don't know, though. But Askeladd, my dude, just playing our poor boy like a fiddle. And he's going to keep doing so until Thorfinn can get over, until Thorfinn can see beyond the revenge, to see that he has no enemies. It's funny because he says he has no enemies, but he's treating Askeladd like his enemy, and his dad's words are, he's like, until you realize that you don't have to get revenge on him. I'm over. It's dead. I'm dead. It's over. You don't have to get revenge on him. Until you realize that and let it go, let go of the past and just move forward, you're going to be a slave to it, and you're never going to be able to defeat him as long as you have that mentality. And Thorfinn is just not there. So this episode was amazing. I love that we got so much insight into Askeladd's character, into Thorfinn, where he's mentally at. We've got, like, the timeline is progressing. We're moving forward. We've got that moment with Hortolin. I like her character a lot. I hope it's not the last we've seen of her, but I don't know. And then just seeing where we're going to go. It's going to be exciting to see where we go to from here. So I don't know if I can wait a week before watching episode 9. I don't know. I'll probably wait till episodes 6 and 7 come out and get your guys' comments on Patreon and YouTube before I watch episode 9. But this episode was great. I loved it. So I'm curious to know what you guys all thought down below. But yeah, this episode was just great, and I'm excited to see where it goes to from here. So in the meantime, I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back very soon with more Vinland Saga. Bye.